Good afternoon. We have completed the third meeting in the format of the Consultative Regional Platform 3+3 at the level of foreign policy heads, and we are grateful to our Turkish colleagues for organizing it, especially since the idea of creating this 3+3 format belongs to President Erdogan. I would like to remind you that the first meeting in this format took place in Moscow in December 2021, then at the level of deputy foreign ministers, and the second was organized in Tehran in October of last year. And now, the third meeting in this composition is taking place in Istanbul. We discussed the direction of further cooperation in key areas and explored potential future developments. Among these, we identified the areas of politics, security, combating the threats of terrorism, and the illegal drug trade in various regions and sectors, focusing on critical and pressing issues. These areas are of paramount importance and require immediate attention. The second topic is the economy, in terms of establishing cooperation in the energy sector and addressing transport and logistics issues. Energy and transport are two additional important areas, such as renewable energy sources. Everyone was in favor of developing cultural and humanitarian relationships and fostering exchanges between creative teams, theaters, and film festivals. These are all plans for the future, but the desires of all our partners are completely aligned. In practical terms, we talked a lot today about the situation in the Middle East, urging for de-escalation and the cessation of indiscriminate military strikes against civilians, including staff of the United Nations, particularly within the framework of the Agency for Palestinian Refugee Assistance and Peacekeepers in Lebanon. We do this once again, as we have always done every time we meet in this format. It was confirmed that indeed the entrances of this particular platform are always open and welcoming for Georgia, and we sincerely hope that in the near future, Georgian neighbors will be able to actively participate in its work. It was agreed that for all the areas I mentioned, we will make comprehensive preparations for the corresponding meetings through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Energy, the Ministry of Transport, and the Ministry of Culture in detail and thoroughly. We anticipate that in the coming year, such meetings on all the various mentioned, relevant, and significant topics will indeed take place. Yes, and we have established such mechanisms. In each country that participated today in the 3+3 event, there are contact points, specific individuals such as those responsible for promoting the agreements that were successfully reached by the ministers on various important issues in order to effectively and efficiently implement the agreements. Well, I think I will just stop here for now. Please, if there are any questions you may have, feel free to ask.
Hello, Sergey Viktorovich. Good afternoon. Indeed, what threats currently exist to regional security in the South Caucasus?
Where?
The South Caucasus region?
In the South Caucasus. I just didn't hear that. Well, there are many threats that can be listed. The main threat is that external players are trying to dictate their terms here and impose their schemes. Schemes aimed not at resolving the region's problems in the interests of all the countries located here, but rather at promoting NATO-centric formats, developing bloc processes, driving wedges, as we say, between neighboring countries, and again using their capabilities as leverage, can be seen in the context of what happened regarding the laws adopted in Georgia that require transparency concerning foreign funding of non-governmental organizations, laws that pertain to preventing the promotion of LGBT propaganda. Immediately, the European Union stated that Georgia is no longer considered a priority partner for discussing EU membership issues because Georgia has violated European values. But if European values consist of funding subversive activities and promoting the LGBT agenda, then it speaks for itself, so to speak, a confession of guilt, an acknowledgement of what these European values truly represent. But besides that, there are certainly still issues in the relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Today, we also talked a lot about this. Both we, the Turks, and the Iranians suggested to our colleagues in Yerevan and Baku to use the 3+3 platform to finalize the work on the peace agreement. We reminded about the preparations and groundwork that were established within the framework of the trilateral work of Russia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, both at the level of presidents and at the level of foreign ministers, deputies, and heads of government, regarding the unblocking of communications, the preparation for border delimitation, and a whole range of other topics. There are also several ongoing and important questions related to the normalization between Armenia and Turkey. Russia indeed actively facilitated the initiation of this very important process, and our close and trusted Iranian neighbors also enthusiastically joined us. Currently, as of now, no meetings are planned at this moment. The Armenian colleagues who are involved in the discussions have taken a pause for the time being. They strongly believe that they need to communicate directly with the Turks first and foremost, and understand thoroughly what needs to be done in this situation. I believe that this is in any case related to the Armenian-Azerbaijani normalization, which is why we propose to consider these issues comprehensively and to encourage the involved countries to reach an agreement as soon as possible. In turn, Russia and Iran are ready to provide assistance if there is interest from the direct participants. And of course, as I have already mentioned, one of the very serious problems returning to Georgia is the well-known attempts by the West to open a second front against Russia, with the deliberate intention of reigniting further tensions and destabilizing the already complex situation in Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and making the ongoing diplomatic relations between Georgia and these two sovereign states more heated. So, most of the risks we observe here are related to the West's attempts to establish and assert its influence in various ways as much as possible. And, first of all, in order to undermine the capabilities of the Russian Federation, to undermine the possibilities for equal and mutually beneficial cooperation between the countries of the South Caucasus and our state,
Sergey Viktorovich, do you perhaps regret that Tbilisi refused to participate in today's meeting? The 3+3 format could have certainly been a good reason for, you could say, almost direct Russian-Georgian contacts. Do you think there will come a time when Georgia will participate in the 3+3 format? Are there any prerequisites for this? Thank you.
as soon as Tbilisi decides, they can come and take their seat at any moment. A chair for them always remains, and indeed the door is always open for them. But as for contacts, we have contacts with Tbilisi. We have a section of interests at the embassy in Switzerland. Our diplomats are actively engaged there in various capacities, and as needed, they have the opportunity to discuss current issues and responsibilities, primarily in the areas of trade, tourism, and direct contacts between people, with the relevant Georgian authorities.
Anastasia Dombitskaya asks businessman Sergey Viktorovich, among the existing platforms where the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict is discussed, which one do you think is the most viable?
So, where an agreement can indeed be reached, if they can agree directly, we would only be delighted. As I already mentioned, today we indeed proposed, if they are ready, to use the 3+3 platform, which would be natural considering that it is in this format that the neighbors of Armenia and Azerbaijan meet. But I repeat, the decision is up to Baku and Yerevan.
Donald Korter, RT, Sergey Viktorovich, against the backdrop of the publication of the so-called Zelensky victory plan, it became known that Biden will not meet with him in Germany. Do you believe that these events are interconnected, considering the current geopolitical climate? And can we expect any changes in Western policy towards Ukraine and the ongoing discussions among international leaders regarding the situation in Ukraine before the American elections?
It is very difficult for me to contemplate or speculate in any conceivable way on what motivates President Biden, and even more so, in any manner, or even begin to understand what motivates Zelensky. We proceed from the fact that Russia's position is well known to everyone. It was outlined by President Putin in June of this year, when he spoke at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But I want to remind once again that with each passing time when Russia shows goodwill and supports specific negotiation solutions, specific agreements, all these agreements are precisely violated by Ukraine. Starting from February 2014, when the agreement between the president and the opposition was broken literally overnight, and indeed a coup took place, there were then the Minsk agreements, which, as you know, were not intended to be fulfilled by their Ukrainian and Western participants. This was yet another broken opportunity. Then here in Istanbul in April 2022, there was an agreement to stop hostilities and resolve the situation between Russia and Ukraine based on fair security guarantees. From the perspective of Russia's interests, from the perspective of Ukraine's interests, and this agreement which we supported was destroyed by the Kiev regime. And with each passing time, as the agreements reached over the last 10 years were consistently and repeatedly blown up, undermined, and violated by the Ukrainian side, leading to significant consequences, Ukraine lost territory over the years. With each passing time, it becomes progressively less and less and more evident. Therefore, what President Putin said in June of this year must be considered in light of the realities on the ground. Our position is clear. No NATO membership, neutral status, resolution of issues concerning the Russian-speaking population and Russians, such as ensuring their rights are protected, which was a gross violation of the UN Charter and numerous conventions, is deprived of the right to do anything in its native language. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church is being destroyed, also in violation of the UN Charter and numerous conventions, and of course Ukraine. We will not accept any option where Ukraine retains the ability to be used by the West to create direct threats to the Russian Federation. The realities on the ground and implications will be taken into account as the West pushes its concepts, torn between supporting Zelensky and coming to the realization of the deadlock of this approach and the broader geopolitical implications. Well, you see, indeed, the victory plan encapsulates the essence of what Zelensky wants. He wants to win. He wants to capitalize on the fact that the West continues to threaten to deliver a strategic defeat to Russia on the battlefield. Here is the difference in approaches, which are essentially psychological and political in their very core essence. By the way, I can remind you that when the agreement was reached in February 2014 between then President Yanukovych and the opposition, it involved holding early elections within, I believe, 5 to 6 months. And during this period, a national unity government was to be formed, as was recorded and signed by both parties. And when the coup leaders came out to Maidan the morning after the coup, they declared, "Congratulate us, we have formed a government of winners." This means they have been striving for victory for a long time, but I think the result will be the same.
Continuing on the topic, Sergey Viktorovich, is the Russian Foreign Ministry aware of the specific content of the secret annexes to the so-called Zelensky plan, and what is in general the West's reaction to these Kyiv initiatives?
We are not interested at all in confidential or secretive applications in any way, and we do not inquire of our Western colleagues about the West's response or reaction, even though we were in communication with them. But this is indeed the reaction on all screens, on all pages, in all social networks and channels, absolutely everywhere, undoubtedly, without a doubt. I can only say one thing, and that is the fact that there are indeed leaks occurring. And according to one of the more recent leaks that have come to light, the main priority for President Zelensky continues to be the acquisition of more weapons. The West has long comprehended that this is indeed an unacceptable scenario. that threatens very significant losses and challenges and difficulties for the West itself. And Zelensky, in his points, subtly mentioned some economic, political, social, cultural, and environmental aspects of the issue. According to leaks, the secret application related to this part of the so-called victory plan involved his readiness to hand over all Ukrainian natural resources to the management and ownership of his Western masters, essentially selling Ukraine. And the last point mentions something about the security of all of Europe. Furthermore, it is crucial to emphasize that the entire continent is at stake. According to reliable leaks, it is also accompanied by a confidential secret appendix stating that the Ukrainian army will be ready to defend Europe after victory and will be prepared to deploy its servicemen. Under the contract, or I don't know how, perhaps in some way, possibly even replacing the American contingents that are stationed in Europe. So, on one hand, he sold all the lands and everything valuable that was in them, and on the other hand, he offers his country as a private military company. Well, this is indicative of this regime.
Sergey Viktorovich, at the summit in Brussels on Thursday, Zelensky once again returned to the topic of nuclear blackmail. Western media are publishing reports citing certain Ukrainian officials who threaten to create nuclear weapons within a few weeks. What do you think is behind Kiev's decision to return to this topic, and what consequences could it lead to? What is your reaction to Ukraine's threat to create nuclear weapons in the shortest possible time if it is not accepted into NATO?
Madmen, and of course nothing will come of this, never, under any circumstances. But I think he has already retracted those words. He probably woke up in the morning and got out of bed on the wrong side. So, I repeat, one can thoroughly and meticulously analyze the statements of this person in various ways and methods for an extended and considerable period of time. His team, but we have already understood the futility of all these attempts and their unnecessary, even counterproductive nature.
Sir, Arti Arawik, in your opinion, what is Russia's perspective and strategic vision for the efforts needed to prevent the Northeast Union from descending into a full-scale regional war in the near future? And what methods does Russia plan to adopt if the conflict escalates into a direct confrontation between Israel and Iran, considering the potential negative impact on international stability? Thank you.
You know, we make very detailed statements on this topic so regularly, and in such detail, our position is very well known. We absolutely advocate for an immediate cessation of any violence, and unequivocally, just as we fundamentally condemn any terrorist acts, as we did after the attack on October 7th of last year. But we also condemn actions that amount to gross, aggressive, collective punishment of the Palestinians, as we are currently witnessing. Moreover, it is not only the Palestinians who are suffering, the Lebanese are also affected. Strikes are being carried out on the territory of Syria and Iraq, and the practice of political assassinations is being implemented, which is perceived extremely negatively in international law, I must say. And undoubtedly, one of the objectives is certainly to draw Iran into combat, undeniably hoping that this will then allow for the direct involvement of the United States in the war in the Middle East region, now against the Islamic Republic of Iran, without a doubt, indeed. A bit of a parallel can indeed be drawn. Zelensky is indeed certainly aiming to do something that would provoke the West to engage in war with the Russian Federation using their combat contingents, without hiding or disguising their military personnel as mercenaries. I am convinced that these intentions, both regarding the Middle East and the situation in Ukraine, are understood, certainly correctly understood, by responsible Western politicians, of whom there are still some, and all of this will lead to nothing. But an immediate ceasefire, because people are suffering, an immediate solution to humanitarian issues. Of course, certainly, when there is an attack on the staff of the UN agency for assisting Palestinian refugees, providing humanitarian aid becomes extremely challenging and arduous. And when peacekeepers from the UN mission in Lebanon are in fact requested to step aside because Israel needs to strike at the positions they occupy, this is also out of line. And I very much hope that indeed the UN Secretary General will truly stand up for his staff and do so from principled positions and more. We insist that the Security Council indeed articulate this demand as soon as possible and as clearly as possible.